What's up, my wizards? It's that boy, Dev, from Mtg. We like magic, and we're going to kick the weekend off the right way with another super budget and rotation-proof deck, and this one is really near and dear to my heart, I gotta tell you. Here's $20 green-white enchantments. Well, for me, it all started back in 1995. I'm embarrassed to admit, I'm a very old man. This is over 20 years ago. But the first time I saw Vine Enchantress, I knew I wanted to build a deck around her. And this was the first time that I actually sat down and did just that. Built an actual deck. That wasn't just a bunch of jank that I threw together because I liked the art or whatever. You know, Vine Enchantress was the first time I really built a deck. And I sat down with 4 copies of Enchantress I was able to cobble together from friends and stuff. And like Spirit Links, Instill Energies, Holy Strengths, you just throw them on her, you know. You just draw all the cards. You play Sylvan Library back when it was $2 or $3. There was such a time. And then at the end of the game, you just lock them out with Island Sanctuary and you're done. Wash your hands of them, you know. Like Vine Enchantress was one of my first lessons that drawing cards is one of the most busted things you can do in a game of Magic, and it was a really valuable lesson to learn. And in some ways, I have Vine Enchantress to thank for this path I've gone down in my life, because she was the first deck I ever really sat down to build. And Magic's had a proud tradition of Enchantress cards throughout the ages. This wasn't the only one we ever got by a long shot. So by the time this year rolled around, 23 years later in my life, and Wizards previewed Satyr Enchanter, I knew I had to build a deck around this, just for old time's sake. Now, while we don't have anything as gross as Island Sanctuary, just look at that card one more time and thank the Lord that Turbo Fog doesn't have that as a weapon. But in any case, even though we don't have anything as disgusting as that or Wild Growth or whatever, we still do have a number of decent auras in this format, and even more importantly, we have a bunch of like white removal that exiles creatures and permanents and stuff and takes the form of enchantments. So it turns all of the 1-for-1 enchantment removal that white's been playing lately into 2-for-1s as long as you have an enchanter out, and that's awesome. Having an Enchanter out can also help you get to your removal when you need it, or your other auras when you need it. You know, drop an aura on a creature, draw into an aura. Or drop an aura on a creature, draw into a removal. Like Satyr Enchanter is amazing. And if you got nothing else out to enchant, you can always throw auras on him, you know. Like a huge 5-power, 5/6 Satyr Enchanter is not half bad either. That said, though, you really don't want to have to attack with your Enchanter if you don't have to, especially in a format with like Settle the Wreckage and Seal Away. You want to keep this as safe as possible, and usually that means not attacking with it. We'd much rather throw auras on creatures that are well equipped to receive them, you know, things with hexproof, indestructible, and abilities like that. But luckily, we've got a ton of creatures that fit the bill, the best of which is definitely Vine Mare. Now, Satyr Enchanter is what I was excited about building this deck around, but in a way, this is actually a Vine Mare deck. This is the most powerful card in the deck. It's already a scourge in Standard. All the green decks are starting to move it into the main deck. It is that important of a card. A hexproof threat like this that can end the game in just a few swings is already good enough, but it's especially good in a deck that just gets to throw game-ending auras on it, you know? The problem with Vine Mare is that its low toughness is kind of a barrier, you know? You can't even swing into a Goblin Chainwhirler with a dry Vine Mare. But as soon as you throw an enchantment on it that gives it flying and lifelink, you know, becomes a whole different beast, and it just ends the game for you almost immediately. And if throwing auras onto like a hexproof creature that's already a threat by itself, before you even put the aura on it, like if that's not good enough, it just crushes black decks. Like Scarab Gods, it swings right through, jumps over Glint Sleeve Siphoners and Gifted Aetherborns and stuff. Ravenous Chupacabra can't kill it or block it. That's pretty important. Creatures brought back by Scarab God or God Pharaoh's Gift, for that matter, are black. So just there's a lot of stuff in this format that can't ever block Vine Mare, and that'll end the game even if you don't throw an enchantment on it right away. But as good as Vine Mare is, we really want most of our creatures to be on the lower end of the curve so we can get suited up as quickly as possible. But that's no problem, because one of the best creatures that this deck could hope for is at the 2-drop slot, and that's Adanto Vanguard. We also have a few enchantments that can give it lifelink, which is really cool, because you'll effectively just be giving her indestructibility for free on some turns, which is really, really important. This is a super aggressive creature, and sometimes we can get this attacking for 6 as early as turn 3. Just Adanto has always actually been a fringe playable card, and in some decks, a very playable card. And this is definitely one of those decks. If we're looking for creatures that we can safely throw auras onto without getting 2-for-1, Adanto is one of the best. But I'm going to kind of sneak 2 copies of Novice Knight into the creature base here. This started off as 4, but you actually don't want to see it all the time, you know. We're not playing a billion auras or anything, so there's some games where if you have multiple copies of these, it's just kind of going to sit there with Defender all game. But in some cases, that's fine, because a 1 mana 2/3 Defender is a very good blocker in the early game, and sometimes beyond. It's also, for all intents and purposes, the least protected creature in the deck, you know? Like, you can get 2 for 1 when you throw the aura on. That's just, it hurts, but when you do get an aura on this safely, it's almost always a good deal. Like, this can jump up to 5 power really, really quickly, or it can jump up to, you know, 3 power and get flying and lifelink. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with a Novice Knight in the deck, so it still gets an honorary place. I wanted to play at least a couple copies of Knight here, but I don't want to go all the way to 4. But I will play 4 copies of Knight of Grace. Now, this is just a solid creature, like in and of itself, which is something I like. I want for our creatures to be good, like even if they don't have auras on them. It's another reason I'm not playing all 4 Novice Knights, but I'm definitely going to play all 4 of this. It's one of the best 2-drops in the format. Plus, if you throw, like, any enchantment on it, it becomes a ridiculous threat, you know? Like, this with flying and lifelink and a power boost is really, really scary for most opponents. The first strike is very, very relevant in a lot of cases. And, of course, between this and Vine Mare, we just, like, crush any deck that carries swamps. They have, like, no hope against us, in most cases. But I should probably actually talk about the enchantments in our Enchantments deck. I haven't told you about a single one. What are we, like 6 or 7 minutes in at this point? I'm just guessing. I'm not sure. In any case, I gotta talk about some enchantments because we're playing like 18 of them. We want to draw a bunch of cards off of Satyr Enchanters. We want to drop fat auras on our Vine Mares and stuff. So let's get to those auras first and foremost here. Now, I'll start things off with the 4 copies of Oakenform. It seems kind of weird, but in most cases, this is way better than a Blanchwood Armor. You know, we are playing some forests in the deck, definitely, but all the way until the very, very late game, this is going to be, in most cases, better than Blanchwood Armor. It's a little bit more consistent, so we're running it instead. Now, this may not look like much on its surface. You know, it's just a PT boost, nothing else, so what's the big deal? But this actually does a lot for the deck on just about any creature we can put it on. You know, it makes Novice Knight not only able to attack and stuff, but it also gives it 5 power, which is pretty good. It gives our other Knight, you know, Knight of Grace, 5 power, and first strike. That's very good in most cases. But even on a Satyr Enchanter, you know, if we can safely apply it to an Enchanter, it puts it well out of range of just about any red burn spell. Vine Mare gives 8 power to, and a much-needed toughness boost. You know, a Danto Vanguard swings for 6 on turn 3 with an Oakenform, so pretty much, no matter what creature we're slapping this on, we're getting a huge benefit out of this power and toughness boost. But we're also playing a suite of white auras in the deck that I kind of want to go over all at one time because they sort of do similar things with some tweaks here and there. So with that in mind, we're going to play 1 copy of Squire's Devotion, 2 copies of Dub, I'm just as surprised as you, I'll get to it in a second, and 2 copies of On Sarah's Wings. Now, Sarah's Wings is probably the one that I don't have to explain too much. The power toughness boost isn't very much, and I don't like that about it, but giving anything, you know, flying, vigilance, and lifelink, those are all crazy abilities, especially on like a Vine Mare. You know, you'll end up with a 6/4 flying, vigilance, lifelink. That'll end the game more often than not, but this goes well on a Danto Vanguard as well, or even a Novice Knight. This goes pretty fine on for swinging the game in your favor. I don't want to pay 4 mana for too many auras, but this has just enough impact on the game, and sometimes can just end the game straight up, that it's worth playing a couple of copies. But it's the other 2 cards I want to talk about most here, because I think Sarah's Wings is just self-explanatory when you look over the list of what auras we actually have available to us post-rotation that we know about. Sarah's Wings is surprisingly one of the better ones, even at a 4 CMC cost. But in any case, I was playing 2 copies of Squire's Devotion, 1 copy of Dub when this all started off. Really, when this all started off, I wasn't even considering playing Dub in the first place, but giving the first strike to Vine Mare and the power toughness boost is actually insanely, insanely relevant. And the first strike goes pretty good on a Danto Vanguard. We'll be paying 4 life a lot fewer times if she just has first strike. Plus, if you're the kind of player that likes to crack jokes, there's a lot in this deck available with Dub, you know, like Vine Mare, the horse finally gets to be a knight. I like that about Dub, but even creatures like Novice Knight and Knight of Grace and stuff that are already knights, when you dub them, they're like, but wait, I've been through this though, right? That said though, Squire's Devotion on a Vine Mare or an Danto Vanguard is more than fine, so 1 copy remains in the main. But we're actually playing one more aura in the deck. I talked a little bit about it earlier. I alluded to it. But you already know what it is. We're playing one copy of Prodigious Growth. Now look, if we're trying to make the deck as competitive as we possibly could, this might be one of the first cards I cut. I mean, it's a 6 mana aura, but I will say, as long as the deck is budget, we're trying to have as much fun as we can, we might as well go for the home run. I mean, this on a Vine Mare is basically like build your own hexproof Galta. There's nothing wrong with that. That wins games right then, and it's even fine on pretty much everything else. You know, this on a Novice Knight, you got a 9-power trample Novice Knight. What's wrong with that? Knight of Grace, you got a first striker. Like, it can even kill Galta sometimes, like, depending on what other enchantments you have on it. So, like, this, again, we might as well swing for the fences, guys. This is a fun deck. So let's put a I can't even say it, Prodigious Growth on a Vine Mare and win a game, which has happened more than once while messing around with this deck. But like I said earlier, maybe the best part of building an enchantments deck right now is that there's an awful lot of enchantment-based removal in white, and almost all of it exiles, which can be really, really good. So let's run over these real quick because you probably know what we're using in the main deck. We're going to play 2 copies of Baffling End, 2 copies of Seal Away, and 4 copies of Ixalan's Binding. Yeah, all 4 copies of Binding. I know we're really running high on the 4 drops here, but that's okay because Ixalan's Binding is, end of the day, maybe one of the most powerful cards in the entire deck, and it's only like $1. We have access to it. Why not play it? Why not play it? It's seriously amazing against not only, Hazarets, Rekindling Phoenixes, Scarab Gods, stuff that you have to exile or it'll kill you, but it's also good against, non-creature stuff like Teferi, Godfarer's Gift. There's just so many good targets for Ixalan's Binding. I think it's more than worth it to play 4 copies. We're also playing 4 different copies of 2-mana enchantment removal here to cover some different bases for us. Seal Away can take care of things at instant speed, which is often really important against Godfarer's Gift decks that play Glorybringer and other haste creatures, or really any creature that affects the board by attacking the turn it enters. So this can be really good against certain decks for certain reasons, but we're also playing the Baffling End in here because we actually don't want to play at instant speed so much. And Baffling End can be very good against things like Llanowar Elves, for instance, while we're on the play, before they really have a chance to impact the board. Now, to keep things budget, here's the mana base I went with. It's a super simple mana base. We're playing 24 lands. But of course, if you had the chops, you could always throw in Sunpetal Grove here after rotation. And there's even more stuff you could play. You could play, Scattered Groves. The Bicycle Green-White land, if you wanted to up until rotation. And Sunpetal Groves is, I think, a pretty penny if you want the one from the latest set, but if you get the ones from pretty much any edition other than the one that just got printed, I think Sunpetal Grove's only like $2 a piece on TCG Player. So it wouldn't be too much to spruce up this mana base, but this works. We don't have too much action on turn 1. We can play these tap lands, and it's pretty fine. But here's the sideboard here, and most of this is focused on one matchup, and that's control. We're very, very bad against control decks. Sometimes they can 2-for-1 us. Sometimes they can just settle the wreckage or whatever, fumigate. And these things can be really, really good against us. Even if we have a Danto Vanguard to fight against fumigates, they still have a lot of tools for taking out our guys. So, again, against the Danto Vanguard, they have things like Seal Away, Commit to Memory, Settle the Wreckage. It can be slaughter out there against control, so we're going to try to put more bodies on the field, first of all, by playing things like Dauntless Bodyguard, which is not only an early body that can get in early damage, we can suit it up early on in the game, too, to try to put as much pressure on them as we can, but this can also protect them, other creatures, sort of stand in front of them while we suit up other creatures. With that in mind, though, we're also going to play a couple of copies of Danitha Compassion, which could be in the main deck, but I like this against control. Not only is it another body, but importantly, it also allows us to double spell on turns after we resolve it. Sometimes drawing out a counterspell on our turn 4 but still being able to play something else can be a really good way to, bluff the bad spell out of our hand, get them to counter that, and then play the aura we actually want to play. Being able to reduce cost is a really underrated ability against control decks, and Danitha can do that all while being a body. You also see the Talons of Wildwood in there, and the only reason that this actually made the deck, it wasn't the main deck to begin with, but it wasn't quite good enough. There are some good things about it, like putting, Trample on a Vine Mare is fairly decent. That's very relevant, but it didn't quite make the main deck. The reason it did make the sideboard, though, is I like it as a pseudo-value engine against decks that play lots of removal, again, control decks, for the most part. Because even if they seal away an Adonto Vanguard or something, then you still won't completely lose your Talons. You know, they'll go to the graveyard, you can get them back later, which is already value enough, sort of, against control decks. Not quite enough, but it is value. But if you have a Satyr Enchanter out, this will just straight up draw you an extra card or two over the course of a game, which could be very relevant. And then finally, we've got the Mending of Dominaria. Not only will this draw us a card off of Satyr Enchanter, so check that box, but this is also good for getting back creatures that we've lost against control decks. You know, we would just play like Nissa Vital Force if this weren't rotation proof. I think that's a much better card, but hey, Nissa Vital Force doesn't draw us a card off Satyr Enchanter, so take that, Nissa. But in any case, Mending will allow us to at least get a couple of creatures back that we may have lost to control, and that's decent. But anyway, hello again, Sarah Madam. Here are your power rankings. Right here to my right, your left. The final score here is 57, which is a relatively low score. But again, the deck is $20, and I mostly built it for old time's sake. But the deck does have some pretty good turn sequences, some good play lines. You know, you play your Satyr Enchanter on turn 3, you can really start getting down on turn 4, especially if you got a Knight of Grace or a Adonto Vanguard on turn 2. Decent sequences there. Plus, there's always the old like Adonto Vanguard into Oaken form into Sarah's Wings. Like that is pretty hot right there. Or Vine Mare into literally anything. It's also decent. So there's that as well. Like, the deck can actually do some good stuff, and it's fairly versatile, considering that it plays like 8 different removal pieces, and good removal pieces at that, in the main deck. You know, you'll never have to worry about a Scrap Heap Scrounger or Rekindling Phoenix ever again. We've actually got some pretty stout removal and some decent threats, which makes for a pretty good mid-range deck, all things considered. Like, there's a lot of different game plans. Like, even if you never draw a card off of Enchanter or remove creatures with Ixalan's Binding or whatever, you could always just, like, Vine Mare into Sarah's Wings, I win. Like, it's a very common way to win the game in this deck. And some people will just, like, stare at it for a minute or two and be like, yeah, I got nothing on that. So I've seen a lot of people on Arena Scoop after, like, 30 seconds of looking at it. So this deck is actually fun a good portion of the time, especially against some of the things that we're playing against in the format currently, you know? Like, if you're playing against just about any mono red deck, and you go Vine Mare into Sarah's Wings, they'll just shake your hand. There's really not a whole lot they can do against it. So it's just ridiculous some of the things this deck can do if it's allowed to get rocking and rolling. And I should mention one more time that if you're playing against a bunch of swamps at F&M, you know, you're seeing a lot of Beetlejuice decks with the Scarab God. And they also play like Glintsleeve Siphoner, Ravenous Chupacabra, Gifted Aetherborn sometimes. Just a lot of decks in the format that play like little black creatures and stuff right now. And big black creatures like Scarab God. So this deck is really powerful against them. You know, obviously Vine Mare is just, it turns all those decks into a joke. It's ridiculous against them. But even like Knight of Grace into Oaken form pretty much ruins their day most of the time. So this deck just makes it hopeless for them in a lot of situations. So if you're playing against swamps at F&M, this is the one. This might be the one. So try this thing out. It's not going to break your wallet too much, and you can play it for well over a year. And I should bring this up before we finish things off here. Selesnya Guild is in Guilds of Ravnica. You know, we get to see 5 different 2-color guilds in the first of these, you know, few Ravnica sets we're about to get into. And Selesnya is going to be in that very first one, green-white. So Selesnya tends to play around with enchantments and stuff. You know, this deck could pick up a couple of really choice pieces once this new set comes out. And if that's the case, you'll be well positioned because you already have the deck. So if you're interested in trying this thing out, click the first link in the description. It'll take you over to the deck list on TCG Player. Yeah, they sponsor my channel, but the reason I took them on as my sponsor is because they are the cheapest place you can get Magic cards on the internet. So I wouldn't have taken anybody else on. I got lots of offers, and I turned them down because their cards are too expensive. Names will not be named, but TCG Player is like legitimately the lowest price place on the internet to get cards. So if you want this deck for that $20 price tag and not a penny more, check out the link, go over to TCG Player and sample their wares. Aside from that, do the stuff that helps me out, but relatively low effort on your part. You know, just like the video. Share the video around if you got an extra thumb. That helps me more than you can possibly imagine. Just leave me a comment. Let me know how you felt about it. All that stuff helps the channel out. But if you really want to help the channel out, dog, just click the link in the description. Go over to the Patreon. Patreon.com/SBMTG. All I ask is $1 a month, $1 every 30 days, and I'll let you know what decks we're doing before we do them, what videos we're doing before we do them, and I'll even have you vote on what decks you want to see, which is going to be really important coming up when we start doing decks for Guilds of Ravnica. So if you want all of those perks and freebies and stuff, well, I guess you can't call them freebies. If you want all those perks, head over to Patreon, throw $1 in the pot. It would be greatly appreciated. But all begging aside, I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out for this one. So make sure you let me know how you felt about it down there. And have a good F&M or a good weekend or whatever. I know a lot of people are moving into college this weekend. So have fun with that. Have good luck finding a card shop and all that jazz. So in any case, I hope you enjoy your day no matter what day it is. You could be watching this video a year from now. Hope you're having a good day, friend. But in any case, I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.